Now we're bringing Wade Shepard. He's the author of Chinese Ghost Cities, and today he's going to be talking about the new Silk Road in a post-COVID world. Wade, we're going to bring you to the stage.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joe. How are you guys doing today? I'm going to take the first part of this talk to kind of give the background of like the Belt and Road Initiative, and then I'm going to dive into maybe about a 15-minute Q&A session to talk about the future of the Belt and Road in the post-COVID world. Let's get into it. 5 years ago, there was nothing here. This is probably the most common statement that I heard over the past 4.5 years that I've been traveling up and down the Belt and Road Initiative and the broader New Silk Road in between China and Europe, down to Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. In all, I probably went to about 35 countries that are kind of included in this broader initiative. And almost invariably, I go out to a new special economic zone, what's supposed to become a new logistic zone or airport, and look at a completely empty field, and the people that I go there with would almost invariably say, 5 years ago, there was nothing here. And the next thing they'd almost always tell me is, we're building a new Dubai, right? The Dubai model is really the shining star of what a lot of these Belt and Road projects are kind of going for. And the difference between Dubai and an empty field in the middle of Kazakhstan is pretty extreme. However, I've always kind of, at that time, I started this journey in 2015. I always kind of had to, hold back on making broader judgments about what was happening because I've seen it before. I started out my travels to new cities in China, and that started in 2005. That was like right at the height of China's new city building boom. And I spent about 3 years traveling the country, kind of recording the progress of these new cities. And when I first started this journey, many people were saying, hey, they're not going to amount to much. This is, excessive spending to, artificially inflate GDP growth, blah, 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 ghost cities and all that. So as I said, I spent about 3.5 years in these ghost cities, visiting them. I even lived in one for a while. And what I found was that the story was very different. If given enough time and allow these projects to continue to fruition, many of China's new cities are actually developed today, and many of them have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people living in them. If you want to get rich, build roads. This is kind of like the slogan of kind of the Chinese model development: build infrastructure first, and then you have the ability to kind of build and construct different types of commercial and industrial activities on top of this infrastructure. It's kind of like a bird kind of building a nest in a tree. I mean, the bird needs branches, the tree needs a trunk and roots in order for that bird to kind of like make a home and like make something out of living in that environment. So over the course of China's new city building boom, which really went from about 2003 to 2015, China is still building new cities, but it's nowhere near what it was during this era. I mean, we're talking like 29,000 high-speed, 29,000 kilometers of high-speed rail lines that were constructed, over 100,000 kilometers of new expressways, 100 new airports, 3,500 new urban areas. And what I was particularly interested in was 1,000 city-level developments, literally hundreds and hundreds of new cities that were kind of created from scratch. And this model really got underway in Shenzhen in 1979. When Deng Xiaoping announced the first 4 of China's special economic zones. The realization at that time was, hey, if we keep our economy the way it's structured, if we keep going on the same road, we are never going to be able to be prosperous enough to ultimately live in our socialist dream. And China realized that they had to kind of do an about face and how they kind of managed their countries and what they could offer the outside world. So rather than changing everything in the whole country all at once, what they did is they took 4 different areas and said, okay, inside these areas, the rules are different. Outside these areas, we're still going to keep everything like how it's always been, but we're going to do this experiment, a live experiment. And Shenzhen was probably, the most successful human experiment ever attempted, at least in the frame of like urbanization. Within a matter of decades, Shenzhen went from like being a string of a couple fishing villages to being a booming like 11 million person metropolis. And that really kind of set China off on the path that it is that it went for the next 20, 30 years and where it is today. Now China's special economic zones contribute about a quarter of the country's GDP, about half of foreign direct investment, more than half of exports, and millions and millions and millions of jobs. So I wrote a book about that called Ghost Cities of China. And then after that, I kind of realized that I was about done with my work in China. Kind of the climate was changing. It was becoming a little more difficult to be an independent journalist and just go out to new cities and take pictures and videos and expect people to be happy with you being there. During the whole 3.5 years that I covered China's new cities, I didn't have any problems with the authorities. I didn't have any problems getting access to sites, and people liked talking to me. Then in 2015, this is about a year after Xi Jinping started his, anti-corruption purge, and China was becoming a little more restrictive on the foreign media. It became pretty clear that I wasn't going to be able to continue doing journalism. I continued doing journalism anymore how I was doing it for the past, 5, 6, 7 years. So I needed an exit plan, and the Belt and Road Initiative proved to be, more than adequate. Basically, when I first started this project, I envisioned the Belt and Road as kind of being a continuation of China's new city building boom. Basically, China Incorporated goes international. So I started out traveling along these new routes, which are, designed to kind of create a China-led digital and physical infrastructure grid all across Eurasia, from China to Europe, down into the Middle East, South Asia, and into Africa. We've all seen these stats on this. Includes 64% of the world's population, 30% of GDP, and then includes, quote unquote, 137 countries and 30 international organizations. There's a lot of propaganda when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative. There's a lot of ways that things are shown to make it look better than what it really is, and one of these ways is include how many countries actually participate. Now, these 137 countries actually just signed non-legally binding MOUs, which some countries place different value on these MOUs than others, but oftentimes they're not really worth the paper they're written on. So let's just keep that into perspective. However, this Belt and Road Initiative, it came at a time when such projects were sorely needed throughout Asia and Africa. The ADB estimates of the infrastructure gap in the Asia Pacific region alone came up to they would need like $26 trillion by 2030 if the region was going to continue developing. This is about like 2.5% of the entire region's GDP. So that's an incredible amount of money that was needed. And the Belt and Road Initiative was kind of China's efforts to kind of fill this infrastructure gap. But the Belt and Road Initiative wasn't alone here. We're also talking about various other initiatives, the North-South Transport Corridor that goes from like India to Russia, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which is a sea-based corridor connected India with Oceania, Africa, and other parts of Asia. The Lapis-Lazuli Corridor, $2 billion initiative by the ADB to kind of connect Afghanistan with Turkey. And then there's a few other ones as well. Basically, all the countries of this region are kind of on the same page, all kind of moving in the same direction. And the Belt and Road Initiative was kind of like a tributary coming into a broader river that could be called the New Silk Road. The New Silk Road, my definition of it, is the kind of the broader inclusion of basically all of these different infrastructure development plans that's kind of span between China and Europe. Now, however, when the Belt and Road first came out, it was kind of seen as kind of a general term that just meant China's international investments or Chinese actions overseas, and there was an absolute bonanza of investment everywhere. Chinese firms going around the world and kind of acquiring European companies. Same thing happening in Africa, and all these deals are being signed. And most of these moves are being made by private Chinese companies that weren't really under the oversight of Beijing. The Belt and Road became a really big brand, and a lot of companies tried to take advantage of this, and it led to a lot of corruption, a lot of failed projects, a lot of white elephants, and things like, One Belt, One Road, camel milk, right? It just became, a broader brand that meant Chinese investment abroad. However, by 2017, 2018, Xi Jinping has kind of had enough of that, and he kind of started taking efforts to better define what the Belt and Road actually is, which was actually much needed, because the Belt and Road is nothing if not vague, right? When it first came out, there was no list, no official list of projects. There was no KPI, no official timeline of when this was supposed to be done. And even today, like as I said, it's even dubious as to like what countries are even a real participant in it. And some major Belt and Road projects. This is just a list of them. Many of these projects actually started before the Belt and Road was announced, and were kind of just collected into it at a later date. Melaka Gateway. Now, Melaka Gateway started out as being one of the shining star projects of the Belt and Road Initiative. It was a major transport-oriented development, port and kind of new city combination built on reclaimed land off the southwest coast of Malaysia. It was meant to have the full gamut of development, from a massive bulk cargo port to a container port to shopping malls and a Malaysia Eye Ferris wheel, and basically it'd be like everything that anybody can dream of being developed on this reclaimed land that's at very, very close to the coast. That's Li Keqiang kind of looking at the project, giving it his approval. That's the position of the project right there. And this kind of like just the location of Melaka Gateway really speaks to the broader ambitions of the Belt and Road. You can kind of see how Melaka Gateway kind of connects to like other projects in Malaysia, such as the East-West Transport Link, which is to build a railway across the country. And this is all done to kind of solve what Hu Jintao dubbed the Malacca problem. Basically, most Chinese trade goes through the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca is pretty much controlled by the U.S. Navy. So a lot of what the Belt and Road opted to do, or aimed to do, is kind of create alternative transport corridors between China and the rest of the world that kind of go around the Strait of Malacca. And you can start to see, of course, there's three land-based corridors between China and Europe, and then there's these multimodal routes that go to the west coast of Malaysia, up to Myanmar, Pakistan, and then Iran, that kind of link in by sea to like Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, and then go overland, or talking about gas or oil, through pipelines up to China over land. And that's just gives kind of China this back door, so to speak, kind of contingency plans in case an event happens with the U.S. and with the United States in the future that could lead to the closure and blockade of the Strait of Malacca. However, there were people already living there in Malacca. This is how close the project was to these people. These people, this is one of the most unique cultures in the world. They're called Cristão. They call themselves Portuguese. They're the descendants of the original Portuguese settlers who came to Malacca 500 years ago, and they still live on the coast today, fishing and just kind of living, it's more or less, I wouldn't say it's they're self-sufficient, but they live off, their farms, and they live off the sea. Anyway, they come in to build this progress. They come in to like build this new development, and it was just kind of like the modern world was being like copied and pasted upon their little village. And the people there, they weren't too happy about it. They weren't consulted at any point during the construction of the project. One day, fishermen just found little flags, stuck out to sea that said Melaka Gateway on it. And they're like, what's Melaka Gateway? Oh, come to find out, it's a new city that we're building in front of your coastline. You're not really going to have access to the sea anymore. You're not going to have, be able to see out to the horizon. And needless to say, the people weren't very happy. However, this Melaka Gateway project kind of really got into problems when President Najib was voted out of power a couple of years ago. It was basically discovered, news came out of his or reputed scandal that he embezzled up to like $7.5 billion of government money, and the fact that China apparently or supposedly had a role in helping him cover that up. Didn't really leave the Belt and Road looking too good in Malaysia. Needless to say, Najib got voted out of power, and the people who came to power after him, they didn't really have much interest in carrying out these $36 billion worth of projects that had been signed and started with China. And that went on. So basically all Belt and Road projects in Malaysia were kind of put on hold for at least a year. Now many of them have restarted again under the brand of being local. If you go there now to Melaka Gateway, you say, hey, is this Belt and Road? Like, oh, no, it's not Belt and Road. This is a local project. It's always been local. So the Belt and Road brand has really been tarnished through projects like that. This is Duqm in Oman. It's $11 billion Chinese, development project that's part of a broader new city that's being built way out in the middle of the desert. 550 kilometers from like Muscat. There's this location right there, and today, Duqm is still. There's not much built there, but now we get to Habantota. Habantota it's a dream, basically. It's a dream of President Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was a previous president of Habantota, or two presidents ago, who had a dream of turning his remote, jungly home region into Sri Lanka's second largest city. And anyway, this is Habantota. New city started from scratch out in the jungles of Habantota, out in the jungles of Sri Lanka. Meant to be Sri Lanka's #2 city. And the problem was that all the initial research assessments said, hey, the port here, a new city here, isn't going to work. Sri Lanka first looked to get money from India and other backers for this project. Nobody would provide them with money except for China. And they built the port. They built a new airport, and unfortunately, not many flights come to this airport. The airport pretty much doesn't have any passengers. Today, it's pretty barren stuff. The local fishermen there, it's another fishing village, and the people no longer have access to, or as much access to the sea as they did before. And eventually people started rioting, saying things like, we don't want to see it like Dubai. And anyway, the Belt and Road is not looking too good. So I only have about 5 minutes left. So let's open this up to some questions.
So Wade, thank you very much. That was very interesting. We have here Sebastian Real asking, how do you see the possibility for non-Chinese to engage in these projects?
I mean, if you talk about the broader New Silk Road, I mean, a lot of it is non-Chinese development and non-Chinese projects. For example, if you go out to like Anaklia Port in Georgia, they say, oh, this is Belt and Road, but there's no sign of Chinese investment anywhere. As far as the Belt and Road Initiative, or what is called what is formally the Belt and Road, a lot of that is pretty kind of closed to Chinese investment. Mostly it's about Chinese state-owned companies making these developments and pursuing these projects. Now, a lot of times they work with partners on the ground. So if you want to like invest in these projects, it's best to work with one of the partner companies that are actually working in one of the partner countries. Why Paul Brooks asked, why do cities fail? Mostly it's due to not very good governance, actually. I mean, especially when you talk about Belt and Road and the New Silk Road, there is a need for this infrastructure and there's a want for this infrastructure. However, a lot of these projects, especially with the Belt and Road, they're kind of tied to local governments or whatever government that is in power. And then when that government gets voted out of power, a lot of times the people who come into power after them don't want to carry on these projects. And as we all know, infrastructure development takes decades and decades to actually come to fruition. How could technology improve the Belt and Road? I mean, the technology that's being delivered now along the BRI is some of the most advanced that there is, at least in terms of like a transport-oriented development. Such as Hormuz Gateway, they use Hormuz Gateway is this dry port in the middle of Kazakhstan. They use the most sophisticated equipment in the world, and that's like in the most remote place on the planet. do you think right now after COVID-19 countries will recover against receiving countries will be against receiving Chinese FDI? No, actually, I think it'll be the exact opposite. I think a lot of what we're seeing now of countries trying to cancel debt to China and kind of the political opposition that they're putting up towards China, or trying to get retribution for the pandemic from China. It seems to be almost like a power play just to get more money from China, right? Now the fact of the matter is that there's not many other backers out there willing to fund these large-scale infrastructure projects. A lot of countries along the Belt and Road didn't pivot to China because they wanted to, or they're clamoring for Chinese leadership. They pivoted to China because they had no other choice. Now, if you look down the Belt and Road, like Melaka Gateway in Malaysia or Habantota in Sri Lanka, there's nobody else willing to fund these projects because they're so ambitious. But China kind of always had a tendency of kind of stepping in to stepping into the gaps when nobody else is willing to provide money for these things. However, China itself is having a difficult time funding the Belt and Road, so we could expect to see China being a little more frugal in how they distribute money in the future. However, I think a lot of these demands for kind of loan cancellation or loan repayment that a lot of countries in Africa are currently trying to bring on China would just result in like more loans being given to them from China. Mark, I mean that varies by project. We're talking about dozens of projects here. I think it's usually around 20 years. Like if we look at some projects in Southeast Europe, the build to transfer operations, usually about a 20-year timeline. How independent are the SEZs in China? Well, in China, they're not really independent at all. I mean, they have different economic rules, different tax regimes, blah, 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 but I wouldn't say that they're at all independent.
There's a question here by Isabella Cristo that I find very interesting, and it's, I lost it. It's, do you think that now after COVID-19, countries will be against receiving Chinese FDI?
No, I don't think so. I think they need it now more than ever. While infrastructure development does cost a lot of money, it's also a very common way that countries kind of bring themselves out of kind of recessions or even depressions. If we look back through history, that's kind of like kind of the trump card that a lot of countries play, especially if we look at China during the financial crisis of 1999 and also in 2008. They were kind of, one of the ways they recovered was investing massive amounts of money into infrastructure development. The United States did the same thing with the building of the interstate network. A lot of other countries have done the same thing. So I could kind of see this. It may sound strange right now, but if this global recession really comes of anything and this keeps going, I would think that a lot of countries would try to get out of it through kind of building new infrastructure by taking out more loans from China and trying to take more FDI from China. And basically, now it sounds contrary to what we're seeing right now with what people are saying, but I would think that countries would give up a lot more autonomy and a lot more power to China when this all comes out in the wash.
How about technology? How can new technologies improve the current situation that you mentioned the Belt and Road is experiencing?
Well, I mean, the Belt and Road is all about technology. I mean, there's a separate program or a separate wing of Belt and Road development called the Digital Silk Road. It's basically a program by Chinese telecom companies to kind of bring the Chinese internet and Chinese IT network. Basically, it's not really going so well in places like Europe, but in places like Central or South Asia, who kind of want this technology, China's kind of offering it to them as kind of a bargain price. It's a market that China is trying to get in on globally, and some countries will open their doors to them. But however, if you talk about the actual like infrastructure projects of the Belt and Road, they're some of the most sophisticated in the world. There's this whole idea of kind of leapfrogging the rest of the world and going from being kind of backwaters or developing backwater areas and making them some of the most technologically advanced in the world. As you can see in places like Forbes Gateway, it's a dry port out in the middle of nowhere in Kazakhstan. They're running some of the most sophisticated technological implements. They include the Navis port system and whatever else, but technology is at the heart of this program.
Paul Brooks wants to know your 5 key points for why do cities fail.
Why cities fail? I mean, poor governance, really, but I mean, the problem is that a lot of new cities don't really fail, especially the big ones. Ones that do just kind of never get started, never get off the ground. Now, a lot of times this is due to, as I said, poor governance. As I said previously, when infrastructure development takes decades, and oftentimes, almost invariably, an infrastructure project will be connected to the government that starts that project. It takes longer to develop a new city than it does the tenure of pretty much any politician in a democratic country. So a lot of times they'll start these projects, take out massive amounts of loans, invest billions of dollars into them, and then they'll get voted out of power. And then it's questionable whether the next people who come into power are going to want to continue on some other, the politicians that they just defeated. Do they really want to continue on with their pet projects, or do they want to do projects of their own? And we see this a lot in China, with a lot of China's new cities, so-called ghost cities, was that, for example, the mayor of a city like Wuxi would start a central business district. The next mayor that come in town will be like, I don't want to work on your central business district. I want my own central business district. So now Wuxi has 3 different, central business districts, right? And just things like that. Just ultimately, there's oftentimes no overarching plan or philosophy to this development. It's just, various political parties saying, oh, we want these vanity projects, or we think we really need these projects right now, and we're going to invest a lot of money into building them. And a lot of times, as anybody knows, these projects take way longer to develop than any politician in democracy has.
Michael Dewis here is asking, what do you know about Serbia's involvement in the Belt and Road Initiative?
Serbia's involvement in the Belt and Road Initiative, like a lot of countries that are on the periphery of more dominant political entities, for example, Serbia with the EU, kind of Sri Lanka and Maldives and Bangladesh with India, Kazakhstan and Central Asia with Russia. They're kind of using China as to give them power and leverage over the EU. So they kind of pit, China and the EU against each other, and to see who could give them the most in far of like loans or infrastructure development or political, assistance. Right. And in a way, it kind of gives these kind of backwater countries that have always been kind of like under the wing or under the umbrella of a more dominant political entity, more freedom and more autonomy to kind of do what they want. 'Cause now all of a sudden they have China coming in and they have this counterweight of another political entity, and they can be like, hey, EU, if you don't give us this medical equipment that we want, we don't give us supplies, we're going to pivot to China. And you know what that means. And meanwhile, in China, they could be like, hey, China, we're, trying to become part of the EU and blah, blah, blah. What can you offer us that's, an attractive enough package to get us to kind of continue making deals with you? And they kind of like pit these global powers against each other. Kazakhstan called it the multi-vector strategy, in the way that they like balance out the West, Russia, and China kind of against each other, and for the purpose of attracting more, investment